For years, Catholic influencers have been telling their audiences that Pope Francis was a problem and that he deserved open resistance. But now, under Leo XIV, they are suddenly telling these very same audiences to zip it. So, why the change? Why the double standard? And most importantly, what does that tell us about their true agenda? Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Well, as many of you know, many Catholics who were previously critical of Pope Francis have now been looking at his successor, Leo XIV, with a kind of cautious optimism. And a big part of that optimism has to do with the hope that he might ease the restrictions on the pre-Vatican II liturgy. Now, this was something that these critics pushed very hard during Francis' papacy. But now, even if their goal remains unchanged, their strategy seems to have shifted somewhat. For example, in a very recent podcast from Taylor Marshall, who was a very well known anti Francis influencer, Michael Matt, who runs The Remnant, another online publication that was very critical of Francis, said this: if there is any goodwill in Pope Leo, which I believe there is, and if he sees that we're willing to meet him a little bit on something like the Latin Mass, well, great. Cardinal Burke was just talking to him last week, probably about the Latin Mass. If Cardinal Burke turns around and he sees a traditional Catholic movement like Night of the Living Dead, Leo is a heretic, Leo is a heretic, well, that's just silly. It doesn't accomplish anything. So, even in terms of trying to get some advantages like the Latin Mass restored, it makes sense to kind of zip it a little bit and see what happens. And the interesting part? Taylor Marshall did not push back against this zip it comment at all. Fast forward to another recent interview. And now, journalist Raymond Arroyo, who, if you remember, was part of the so called papal posse during Francis' years, sat down to interview Cardinal Raymond Burke. During this interview, Arroyo asked Cardinal Burke about many topics, and one of them was the pre-Vatican II Mass. Namely, Arroyo asked if a Mass that Cardinal Burke is going to celebrate in St. Peter's Basilica this October could be a chance for Leo to see the people who are keen on this liturgy and try to reach out to them. And this is what Cardinal Burke responded. Yes, I'm sure it will be a very significant event. I trust the Holy Father will follow it. I know he will, and I am certain that he will. And then he will see that this isn't a question of some ideology or some kind of country movement in the Church, but rather of devoted Catholics, very much at the heart of the Church, who find the form of the Roman Rite to be so spiritually nourishing for them in its richness. I'm sure that this will be a significant moment in bringing light to what, in my judgment, is a false controversy. Now, to be fair and clear, I do not think that Cardinal Burke was saying here that those who attend the pre-Vatican II Mass, even the most fringe elements, are ideologues or contrarians, but that's how his words were interpreted by many anti-Francis critics. And of course, this stirred up controversy on social media, with many people rushing to defense of Burke's words as they had been interpreted. And what is fascinating here is that these Francis critics, whether they mean it or not, are basically conceding here, at least implicitly, three very important points. One, that there is a problem with the rhetoric and criticism towards the Pope coming from traditionalist circles, especially online. Two, that this rhetoric is actually counterproductive if the goal is to get restrictions on this pre-Vatican II Mass lifted. And three, that moderate traditionalists now have to step in to help tone things down if they want to achieve this goal. And this is significant because this is exactly what I and many others were saying during Francis' papacy. But then, when we said the exact same thing, people got angry. They accused us of victim blaming. They said that these were just a few rotten apples on social media with no significant real world impact. They deflected, they threw around talking points, they refused to engage with these same points. So I'm not at all surprised when these Catholics get angry at these influencers for making the points that they were conditioned to reject in the first place. So here's the irony. These influencers were the ones who created this whole situation to begin with. For years, they thrived on promoting a hermeneutic of suspicion towards the Pope. They told their followers that they were being persecuted, that they bore no responsibility for the things that were happening, and that they should be free to resist authority if they did not agree with it. And now these same influencers think that they can just flip a switch and tell their followers, hey, now it's the time to zip it or you're the problem. Of course, it's not going to work well. I mean, sure, some people are going to listen to them just like they listened to them over Pope Francis, but some others, they will not. They were told that they should resist authority. And if the Pope himself does not hold authority over them as Catholics, what authority do these influencers hold over them to just tell them to shut up? They got the genie out of the bottle. It's going to be very hard to put it back in. And interestingly, but not at all surprisingly, these same commentators who once thrived in skirting responsibility away from their followers are now trying to shift responsibility away from themselves. For example, Kale Zeldin, a YouTuber who was also very critical of Pope Francis, tweeted very recently, the commentariat that grew up around the novelty of Pope Francis, both the pro and con camps, are over. Done. He was a unique, once in a 500-year phenomenon. You can't rage stream or splain stream your way back into relevance. This is a strategy that I already explained in greater detail on my video on moderate Catholics, which I will link in the video description below. Back in Francis's years, these voices were fueling conflict with the Holy Father all the time. But now, they're trying to rebrand themselves as the moderates, trying to distance themselves from the more extremist Catholics of the movement that they helped build, and trying to place themselves in the center between those extremists and those Catholics who remain faithful to the Pope, as every Catholic should, painting these others as the other extreme, so that there is the rage stream and those whom they derogatorily call Pope-splainers. But here's the thing. The differences between Francis and Leo do not exist except on these commentators say so. There is no substantive difference between both pontiffs apart from differences of style. It's all a matter of appearances, as I have also explained in a previous video, which I will link in the description below. So, no matter how much these commentators try to insist that the lack of recent controversies has to do with differences between Leo and Francis, the fact of the matter is that it actually proves that the problem was with them, the rage stream, all the time. Since that so called rage stream is not manufacturing controversies anymore, there's less drama. And the reason why they're holding back is because they want to get into Leo's good side to get something from him. And here's what this recent lack of controversy also proves, that no matter how much these commentators try to insist on this false equivalence, that the problem was never with the so-called Pope-splainers. These were just trying to clean up the mess that they were making. If they are not making a mess, then the so-called Pope-splainers are not stirring up trouble also. This leads us to a very sad conclusion. If those people can now zip it under Leo XIV, they could have done exactly the same thing under Francis for the exact same reason if they wanted to. And this is tragic because during Francis's papacy, the world was paying attention. We had a magnificent window of opportunity to finally evangelize at a global stage. But instead of seizing this moment, these Catholics with the biggest platforms chose instead to use this opportunity to attack the Pope at every turn. And for what? For nothing. Because they are willing to do now for Leo what they did not want to do with Francis. It was just because of personal preferences about who the Pope is. Again, truly tragic. But okay, that's the past. The greatest question facing us now is, what about the future? But before I answer, if you like this video, please consider hitting the like button and also subscribing to this channel so that you'll always be updated whenever a new video is released. Please also visit my personal website, pedrogabrielwriter.com, where you will learn more about my articles and books. Now, back to the question, what does the future hold for us? Remember, what we're dealing here is with a transactional mindset. These Catholics are not following Leo out of loyalty for the Vicar of Christ himself. They are giving him a chance because they want something from him. Namely, they want him to ease the restrictions on the pre-Vatican II liturgy. And some think that this objective is obtained through staunch resistance, whereas others think that this objective is attained through softer lobbying, and that's where the zip it strategy comes from. So, what happens if Leo doesn't deliver? If that happens, two scenarios are possible, and I've already talked about each one of them in another video, which I will also link in the video description below. But let's revisit them. If Leo doesn't give them what they asked for, these so-called moderates might just flip back to resistance mode. And in fact, Michael Matt has admitted as such in his chat with Taylor Marshall, where he said, "Let's just wait and see. It does not mean that the resistance is over. We can go back to that at any time. If that happens, well, forget about any chances of Traditionis Custodes being revoked or even softened. It will all go up in smoke." The other possibility is that these so-called moderates will try to drag things out as much as possible. But the more things get dragged out, the more tension will build inside the ranks into unsustainable levels because more and more people are going to realize that Leo is basically continuing on Francis' line. When that happens, there's going to be a rift in their movement. On one side, sadly, some people are going to become further radicalized. On the other side, more and more people are going to notice that this apparatus of influencers, commentators, and whatnot are just not reliable guides of what is happening inside the church. And they are going to drift outside of their orbit of influence. And that's where those who remain faithful to the Pope, no matter which Pope, will have a role to participate in. That's when they can present to these people the real Catholicism as it truly is. The Catholicism of Leo, the Catholicism of Francis as they truly are without the ideological lens. And if people want to know what Leo actually thinks about this topic, here's what he said in a recent interview to Crux. I do know that part of that issue, unfortunately, has become again part of a process of polarization. People have used the liturgy as an excuse for advancing other topics. It's become a political tool, and that's very unfortunate. I have not had the chance to really sit down with a group of people who are advocating for the Tridentine Rite. There's an opportunity coming up soon, and I'm sure there will be occasions for that. But that is an issue that I think also, maybe with synodality, we have to sit down and talk about. So, what does this mean in practice? It means that if people want to make a case for the liturgy they prefer, then Leo is telling them exactly what to do. Dialogue, synodality, and do so with Peter and under Peter. And that's the sticking point because these are all the things that these critics were conditioned to reject under Pope Francis. And yet, this is the path that Leo is opening up to them. So it's not about zipping it, because that would be fake. It's a strategy, a ploy, and it's not honest with the church and with yourselves. It's about talking, yes, but in the spirit of dialogue, of synodality, and filial devotion to the church under the Pope. That means treating dialogue, synodality, and obedience to the Pope as integral parts of our faith, not as something that you can reject willy-nilly. And if they can do that, they might not only be able to save the pre-Vatican II liturgy, they will also help themselves grow in faith, because they'll grow in communion with the Church, and namely the magisteria of Francis and Leo. And when they do so, they will acquire a less fragmented view of their own faith and thus break free from the narrow perspective that these pundits have been promoting to them for years. And they will finally see Catholicism as it truly is and follow it. No need to zip it, just a need to convert. Again, if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Remember, I will also leave links to my other videos that I mentioned here in the description below. Also, please visit my website pedrogabrielwriter.com and consider checking out my books. I think you will also enjoy them. That's all for today. God bless. Let's dialogue in a synodal way and see you soon.